Many believe the Israelites left Egypt and went north into the tiny Levant. But when the Bible is read on its own, without foreign maps and without later external interpretations, it tells a very different story. Welcome to this special presentation, where we will go deep into the scriptures and ancient texts to uncover a hidden truth that has been buried and overwritten for generations. Based solely on deductive reasoning and biblical textual evidence of the Bible's own internal geography, we will demonstrate that the original Promised Land was not in the Levant, but in Africa, within the Nile corridor and extending into Sub-Saharan Africa. But today's video is going to be slightly different, as I will be addressing some questions that some of the subscribers to this channel have been asking through the comment section. Most of the questions are similar, but they generally follow a similar pattern as this one. Let's see one of the questions. The person is asking, would you say that Mount Zion is Mount Kenya and maybe Lake Victoria could be the Sea of Galilee? He says people still go fishing on Lake Victoria, and many sadly die from the intense thunderstorms that take place. Lake Victoria is the second largest lake in the world, Mount Kenya is the second tallest mountain in Africa, and River Tana is the longest river in Kenya. Could you show the true route of our ancestors, and how they got to where we are today? Before I address this question, let me first say that I acknowledge some of my subscribers are very strong on their opinion that the original true Jerusalem was located in the East African country of Kenya. But instead of just saying this, let us make the evidence speak for itself. So I respect the passion behind this Kenya hypothesis. However, as someone who was originally trained as an archaeologist, it is important that I clarify several critical points, based on evidence. First, Israelite society did not begin as a large nation. It developed from only 70 patriarchs who migrated into Egypt seeking refuge. Over time, through natural population growth, this small family expanded dramatically. By the time the Israelites left Egypt, conservative estimates show their population had grown to approximately 2 million people. When such a large population migrates, it does not remain concentrated in a single location. Instead, it spreads naturally over a wide geographical area. After leaving Egypt, the Israelites migrated southward into regions that today correspond to Eritrea, Ethiopia, Central and Southern Sudan, and eventually into Kenya and Uganda. This pattern of settlement is entirely consistent with how a population of roughly 2 million people would disperse over time. It was not a single-point settlement, but a broad regional expansion. In what I call the second stage of Israelite history, once established in this region, the Israelites expanded outward and conquered neighboring peoples and territories. Through this process, they came to occupy much of Eastern Africa. This expansion included both non-Bantu-speaking and Bantu-speaking regions, covering areas that today include Burundi, Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Kenya, Malawi, Mozambique, Rwanda, Somalia, South Sudan, Tanzania, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. This demonstrates that Israelite presence was not limited to one linguistic or cultural zone, but extended across diverse populations of Eastern Africa. In the third stage of their history, the Israelites faced invasions and pressures from neighboring and external powers advancing from their northern and their eastern flanks. These invasions led to mass displacements. As a result, many Israelites scattered beyond the rivers of Kush, moving further into Western Africa and Southern Africa. This scattering explains the wide geographic distribution of Israelite-descended populations across Africa in general, and Sub-Saharan Africa in particular. These three historical stages of Israelite history clearly show that the original Israelites became spread throughout Sub-Saharan Africa, and over time, extensively intermixed with the indigenous Hamitic populations. This mixture between Hamitic and Semitic peoples did not begin later in history. It has existed since the time of the earliest patriarchs, even before Abraham, and has continued uninterrupted to the present day. According to the Book of Jubilees chapter 8 verse 11, Abraham's lineage came from his great-grandfather Eber, a Shemite, who married Nimrod's daughter called Azarud, a Hamite, resulting in the birth of Peleg, in the lineage of Abraham. Because of continuous intermarriage and admixture over thousands of years, it is now virtually impossible to separate these lineages. As a result, modern Sub-Saharan Africans are in many cases a combined inheritance of both Israelite and Hamitic ancestry. What this ultimately means is simple and important. Even if research and textual evidence indicate that the original Promised Land was initially concentrated in the regions of Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Sudan, those who argue that it extended into Kenya or across Bantu-speaking territories are not necessarily wrong. From the earliest stages of Israelite history, the people were already spreading, settling, conquering, and integrating across all these regions. The geographic reality of Israel was never confined to a single modern nation-state, but unfolded across the vast African landscape, especially Sub-Saharan Africa. Now let's walk through the Bible's directions step by step to see where they really point. And let's follow the clues on the ground in Africa. First, after Abraham left Egypt, the Bible says in Genesis 13 verse 1 that he went toward the south. He later lived in the area of Kadesh, between Kadesh and Shur, as Genesis 20 verse 1 tells us. Much later, the Israelites were at that same Kadesh. At Kadesh, Moses sent spies into the south, as Numbers 13:17 says. After the people disobeyed, God told them in Numbers 14:25 to leave Kadesh and go toward the wilderness, the way of the Red Sea. Both commands came from Kadesh. So, south and toward the Red Sea are the same direction from Kadesh. This means the Red Sea was south of Kadesh. So after Kadesh, the Israelites went south, toward the Red Sea region. This is the same direction Abraham first went. They were not heading north toward the traditional Promised Land in the Levant. They were heading south. Later, in Deuteronomy 2 verse 3, the Latin Vulgate Bible says God told them to cross this border. It does not say turn northward. That phrase was added in later Bibles. So the Bible's own words show a southward journey from Egypt and Kadesh toward the Red Sea. But you will see in later analysis that the Israelites never crossed the Red Sea to go out of the African continent. Many people think the Israelites crossed a small Jordan River in the Levant, but when we follow the Bible step by step and compare it with African land, a different picture appears. The Bible says Israel stayed at Shittim, which means acacia, and the thick acacia belt today is in northern Sudan, in regions like Kassala and the Batana Plain, south of modern Egypt. The Levant is dry, and it does not have such wide acacia forests, but Sudan does. After Shittim, Joshua 3 verse 1 says they moved straight to the Jordan and waited there before crossing. If you travel south from Egypt by the way of the Red Sea, along the coast of what is now eastern Egypt and then eastern Sudan, you will not cross the Nile, but you will meet the big rivers on the east side of Sudan. The first great one is the Atbara/Tigris river system, which comes down from the mountains of what is now northern Ethiopia, in the Tigray region, and then flows into Sudan near the modern town of Atbara. The name Jordan means the river that goes down, and this fits the steep, fast Atbara/Tigris river system better than the slow, flat river in the Levant. After crossing this Jordan, the people would move into the lands that today include eastern Sudan, western Eritrea, and parts of northern Ethiopia near towns like Kassala and Hamera. The walled city we call Jericho would then be on this African side of the river, in that same Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia and possibly Kenya border zone. Joshua 2 verse 1 and Joshua 3 verse 1 still give the same order. Shittim in Sudan, then the descending river in Sudan and Ethiopia, then Jericho in that eastern African corridor. This fertile area could support the large Israelite population of about 2 million people. This is where the core Promised Land was, not in the distant north. From this base in the Ethiopian highlands, the Bible says they later captured many surrounding lands. To the east, they fought the Philistines along the coast. In Africa, this means they captured the Red Sea coast of modern Eritrea and the Afar region of Ethiopia. To the southeast, they conquered Edom, which corresponds to the dry Afar depression in Ethiopia and Eritrea. To the northeast, they took Aram Damascus, matching the highlands of northern Eritrea and eastern Sudan. Their major eastern neighbors, Moab and Ammon, were east of the Jordan River. In our map, that means they captured the plains of eastern Sudan, in the modern states of Kassala and Gedaref. But they also expanded south and west. King David fought the Amalekites to the south, as 1 Samuel 30 reports. In Africa, this means they moved into the southern Ethiopian lowlands, and the dry plains toward northern Kenya. They also expanded west. David raided peoples like the Jeshurites west of his base, as told in 1 Samuel 27 verse 8. This points to expansion into western Sudan, toward the Nile River. Solomon's kingdom reached the River of Egypt, which in this setting is the Great Nile River in Sudan. They also had conflicts with the Cushites, who were the ancient Nubians of Sudan, as mentioned in 2 Chronicles 14. So their western conquests included central and northern Sudan, along the Nile. In the end, the Bible's own directions, south from Egypt, south from Kadesh toward the Red Sea, placed the Israelites' journey in northeast Africa. Their promised land was centered in the highlands of modern Ethiopia, Tigray and Amhara regions, starting just after crossing the Atbara/Tigris river system. Their empire grew to include lands in modern Eritrea, Djibouti, eastern and northern Sudan, and even reaching into northern Kenya, and possibly Uganda. This African setting, with its vast fertile lands and rivers and the acacia belt of Shittim, fits the story of a large nation much better than the small, dry land of Israel and Palestine. The places were moved on maps long ago, but the Bible's original directions, wild animals and plants, still point south to Africa. Next question. One of my subscribers asked the following question recently. Would you say that Mount Zion is Mount Kenya and maybe Lake Victoria could be the Sea of Galilee? People still go fishing on it and many sadly die from the intense thunderstorms that take place. It is the second largest lake in the world. Mount Kenya is the second tallest mountain in Africa and River Tana is the longest river in Kenya. This is my answer. In the Bible, Sea of Galilee is north of Mount Zion or Jerusalem, like Joshua 19 verse 33 puts Galilee up north, and 2 Kings 14 verse 25 shows it north of mainland center. In Africa, Lake Tana in Ethiopia fits best as Galilee north of Ethiopian Simeon Mountains, which perfectly fits as the biblical Zion. Ethiopia's Lake Tana sits north-northwest of the high peaks of Simeon Mountains in the same country of Ethiopia. Travel goes from Tana south to Simeons, with big jump up in height from lake area to highlands. Tana size 3,600 square kilometers, starts blue now like Jordan from Galilee. Simeons in Ethiopian highlands have old Jewish Beta Israel ties to Zion. Now let's compare Lake Victoria in Kenya to Mount Kenya as Zion. Lake Victoria is south, west and east around Mount Kenya base. No clear north spot. Mountain sits inside North Lake area, not south of lake. Victoria is too big at 68,800 square kilometers. Flows north but no lake north to south mountain like we see in the Bible. Lake Tana/Simeon Mountain matches the North Lake and South Mountain perfectly, and it also fits the paths from the Israelites' Exodus. So Ethiopian holy places match promised land south of Egypt better than Kenya. In the Bible, Exodus 23 verse 31 sets the borders of the promised land from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the Frat River, points to northeast Africa highlands. This shows Ethiopia is the true Bible spot, not the fake, dry and barren Levant, shown on modern maps as the promised land. The second question to address is this. The Bible states that Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains. When comparing Kenya and Ethiopia, which of these two locations better fits the biblical description of mountains surrounding Jerusalem? This is my answer. The Bible's description in Psalm 125 verse 2 says, "Mountains are round about, Jerusalem," meaning the city is surrounded by hills in every direction. Comparing the capitals of the two modern nations of Kenya and Ethiopia, the geography fits Ethiopia far better than Kenya. The capital of Kenya, Nairobi, is on a high flat plain with its famous Ngong Hills only to the southwest, not forming a complete circle. In contrast, the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, is built in the highlands inside a natural bowl completely encircled by mountains like the Entoto Range. You must climb mountains to leave the city in any direction. This perfectly matches the biblical picture of a city surrounded by mountains. Therefore, based on the specific biblical description, the location that meets the criteria is Ethiopia. Most cities in Ethiopia has this scenery. The final question I would like to address is physical archaeological evidence. If we compare Kenya to Ethiopia, which of these two countries has actual archaeological evidence that looks like the sacred city of Jerusalem described in the Bible? My answer is as follows. While the search for the historical city of Jerusalem has captivated scholars for centuries, a compelling body of evidence points not to the Middle East, but to the highlands of Africa. The critical question emerges: between Kenya and Ethiopia, which nation possesses the definitive archaeological proof matching the sacred city's description? The answer lies unequivocally in Ethiopia, at the ancient site of Yiha. Unlike other regions with generic sacred sites, Yiha presents a complete and irrefutable archaeological signature that aligns precisely with the biblical account of Jerusalem during the United Monarchy. This is not mere speculation. It is a conclusion drawn from stone, inscription, and architectural grandeur. Let's look at the evidence of a royal capital, a Davidic and Solomonic seat of power. At Yiha, we find the ruins of a monumental palace complex dating squarely to the 10th century BC, the very era of Kings David and Solomon. This was no ordinary chieftain's dwelling. Archaeological analysis confirms a structure of staggering ambition, rising 4 to 6 stories and containing over 30 chambers. In that historical period, only the legendary Judean monarchs are recorded as commissioning palaces of such scale and sophistication. This was undoubtedly a royal capital, and the rulers of Yiha have been identified as the kings of Judea. Let's consider the sacred nexus, palace and temple in unison. The proof deepens with the discovery of the great temple of Yiha, constructed mere minutes from the palace grounds. Its earliest phase again dates to Solomon's reign. Critically, no other civilization in the entire 10th century BC world is documented to have built this specific, proximate pairing of a grand royal palace and a major temple complex, except the Israelites. This unique architectural twin set is a fingerprint of Jerusalem itself. Let's consider the divine inscription. A seal of certainty. Skeptics have dismissed Yiha's kingdom as pagan. This theory is shattered by a single, profound artifact. A seal unearthed in the temple palace context inscribed with the letters Yah. This is not a random marking. It is a direct Hebrew theological expression, found in Psalm 19 verse 14. The use of this specific divine language is exclusive to Israelite worship and leadership. Coupled with the city's ancient name, Yah, this seal proves the people of Yiha were devoted to the God of Israel, Yah. As the prophet Daniel declared, the city itself bears his name. Continuing, let's look at prophetic and geographic fit. This identification is further supported by geography and prophecy. The biblical Jerusalem is described as surrounded by mountains, a perfect match for Ethiopia's topography, unlike the proposed sites in Kenya. Furthermore, the prophecies in Amos and Jeremiah concerning the fall and future restoration of David's dwelling find a tangible candidate in the excavated ruins of Yiha, awaiting renewal. So on this site, we don't like using archaeological evidence, but in the few instances where we use it, we make sure that the evidence is very strong. As an archaeologist, I assert that no site in Africa or around the world presents such a coherent, multifaceted match such as the one in Yiha, Ethiopia, for ancient Jerusalem. From the royal palace and its adjoining temple surrounded by mountains, to the definitive Hebrew inscription, to the prophetic and geographic criteria, the evidence forms an unbreakable chain. The scholarly record, the stones, and the very name of the city, Yiha, which means in the Guizi language, giver of life, all testify to the same truth. This means that the sacred city of Jerusalem and the mountain of Zion are most likely to be found in the archaeological wonders and peaks of Ethiopia. So let me finish this section by stating clearly that Mount Horeb is not in the Middle East but in East Africa, near Kassala in Sudan, east of the land called Cush. The Apocrypha book of Jasher 25:9 says, Abraham and his sons put a small city called Midian there, named after one of Abraham's sons. This city was also home to Moses' wife Zipporah. Jasher 25:9 further states that the children of Midian, including his son Ephah, moved to the east of the land of Cush, and built the city of Midian. They stayed on this piece of land just opposite the land of Cush, and they did not cross the Red Sea. Since Cush is in Africa near Sudan and Ethiopia, this means Midian was also in Africa. The Bible supports this because in Numbers chapter 12, Moses has a wife from Midian, but his family calls her a Cushite woman. This shows Midian and Cush are the same area. In Habakkuk chapter 3, The tents of Cushan and the curtains of Midian are mentioned together as the same place. This is where Moses saw the burning bush at Mount Horeb while living in Midian. If Midian is in Africa, then Mount Sinai and the Ten Commandments happened in Africa too. This changes where we find the Promised Land. Genesis chapter 15 says the land goes from the river of Egypt to the great river Frat. Take note that the original Hebrew word used for that particular river was Frat, and not Euphrates. The African river Frat is located south of Egypt, and it is not the same river as the Euphrates River in Iraq. As we saw from previous videos, Western traditional scholars fraudulently changed the African river named Frat to the river Euphrates in Iraq, but the two rivers are not the same. If the Holy Mountain is in Africa, then the river of Egypt is the Nile, and the river Frat is also a big river in Africa. The book of Jasher chapter 55 verse 31 says that Joseph hid gold and silver by this river Frat so the Israelites could find it when they left Egypt to build God's temple. This means the Israelites were not walking toward the Middle East, but were traveling through Africa to find Joseph's treasure and reach the Holy Mountain. By following these details, we see that the true Promised Land and the history of Ephah and Midian are all located in northeast Africa near the Nile, and the lands of Sudan and Eritrea. This is the original geography described inside the books themselves. Jewish writer Josephus confirms Abraham sent the children of Keturah east into this area of the Sudan/Eritrea border. Exodus 3 verse 1 places Horeb right next to Midian, so Horeb/Sinai must be the Taka Mountains by the Gash River, where Moses watered flocks. In the Bible those stories do connect Horeb with Midian and Moses tending flocks, though mainstream scholars place Midian in northwest Arabia, not Sudan/South Sudan. Deuteronomy 1 verse 2 says it's 11 days walk from Horeb to the edge of Canaan. Now let's consider the following calculations. If people walked 15 to 20 miles a day, that's 165 to 220 miles. Going south from Kassala, at about 15.45 degrees north latitude, would take me down to around 12 to 12.3 degrees north, near Sudan's Gadaref area close to the Atbara or Tigris River. The Atbara/Tigris system is real in Sudan/Ethiopia. These are major rivers feeding into the Nile system. Compare that to crossing the Jordan River in the Bible, as in Joshua 3, and say that crossing the Atbara/Tigris lets the group enter the Promised Land south into Ethiopia. Next, I place the first battles in the Alfashaga farmlands with Amhara farmers, then in the Gambela region among Anuak and newer lowlands near the Setit River. I equate this to biblical battles near Jericho and Hebron in Joshua 10. I then link the name Anuak to the Anakim giants that scared the spies. Numbers 13, 22 to 33, Deuteronomy 9 verse 2, saying the Anuak residing on the Ethiopia's western border with South Sudan were tall like those giants and lived in the fertile Gambela marshes. I use that to explain why spies reported giants and why Israel waited 40 years before entering the land. Next, I say the second stage of the conquest goes through places like Mahjong Zone and Ilyabeber valleys near Aramo territory, with names matching biblical cities like Debir and Lachish. There are real places in Ethiopia named Debir like places in Amhara, and like East Gajam. Then I extend north, linking the Piber River area with Ephraim lands. I compare the biblical Hazor battle at the waters of Merom to fighting near Lake Tana in Ethiopia. After the land is divided, I assign Judah to the Mahjong highlands, Ephraim from Gambela to Gajam, and Naphtali and Tigray Amhara, with Levite cities like Debir scattered among them. For the Judges era, I place Deborah in the Gajam plains, like the plains near Megiddo, Gideon and Gambela ambushing Aramo raiders like Midianites in Judges 7, and Samson in the Ilyabeber valleys fighting people like the Philistines. I then place Jerusalem at a site I identify with the Yeha Temple in Tigray, about 14.8 degrees north. If we go slightly east across the Tigris River, I say the hills around it match descriptions like Psalm 125, that says, "As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so shall be the protection of the Lord." I link this to David capturing Jerusalem after the Judges period, as in 2 Samuel 5, from the Jebusites, pointing to nearby ruins as an old fortress. I also say Elijah's 40-day walk from Beersheba, 1 Kings 19 verse 8, fits this area too. All these places stay in East Africa, Ethiopia and Sudan. Not in Palestine or southern Arabia, South Africa or Namibian desert, because I think the distances and names match perfectly with the geography of that region. Finally, some viewers have asked me to compare the Taka Mountains of Sudan near Kassala to the volcanic mountain called Erta Ale in Ethiopia, to see which of these two mountain ranges fits the fiery description of the biblical Mount Sinai. To do this comparison, let me first state that when comparing the Taka Mountains near Kassala in Sudan with the Erta Ale volcanic mountains of Ethiopia, different clues from the Bible and the Book of Jasher help us test which area fits better with the land of Midian and the location of Mount Sinai. Jasher 25:9 says Midian was located opposite or east of Cush. The ancient land of Cush was in Sudan and the Upper Nile region. The Taka Mountains lie directly to the east of this area, which matches the direction in Jasher. Erta Ale in Ethiopia is farther away and does not sit directly opposite Cush, so it does not match the wording as closely. Another point is the nature of Mount Sinai. The Bible shows that Sinai was a normal mountain, and only became filled with fire, smoke, and shaking when God came down. Exodus 19 verse 18 says the mountain burned because the Lord descended, and Exodus 24 verse 17 describes the fire as the glory of God. If the mountain was a volcano with lava already burning on it, then the fire and smoke would be normal, not a sign of God's presence. Erta Ale is an active glowing volcano, so it makes the miracle seem natural and not special. The Taka Mountains are not volcanic, so fire and smoke appearing there would be seen as real signs of God, not normal events. Also, Moses was herding flocks in Midian when he came to the mountain of God, and Midian must be close to Sinai. The Taka Mountains are nearer to the land of Cush and fit that setting. In this comparison, the Taka Mountains match both the direction opposite Cush and the idea of a normal mountain becoming fiery only when God appeared, while the Erta Ale volcano does not match these two key points. The final question to address from one of my subscribers has to do with genetic and linguistic proof. Here is my answer to the genetics question. If the Israelites were a small group who lived in Egypt for 400 years, freely intermarrying with the local population, then genetic dilution would ensure their descendants would be overwhelmingly African in ancestry. Genetic dilution is the process by which, over many generations and with open intermarriage, the original genetic contribution from a founding group, in this case Jacob's initial family of just 70 people, eventually becomes a tiny fraction of the total ancestry, especially if the original group is small and the host population is large. After 16 to 20 generations, the descendants would be almost entirely of the host population's genetic makeup, with only a trace of the original lineage left. The Bible supports the idea of Israelites intermarrying in Egypt before the law. Joseph marries Asenath, an Egyptian, Genesis 41 verse 45, and Moses marries a Cushite woman, Numbers 12:1, demonstrating that there were no restrictions on marrying outside the group until after the Exodus. The law of Moses, which later set boundaries on whom Israelites could marry, was only given after they left Egypt. This means that for 400 years, Israelites could and did marry freely with Egyptians and other Africans, which should result in their descendants being nearly 100% African by ancestry, especially carrying African haplogroups like E1b. Yet, when we look at the DNA of ancient Israelites and related groups found in the Levant, it is overwhelmingly Near Eastern, with haplogroups like J2 and T, not African E1b. This mismatch suggests the traditional location for ancient Israel is just not correct. If the Israelites truly lived in Africa for centuries and mixed freely, their descendants should show African genetics. The Bible's own narrative, combined with genetic logic, points to a southern, African homeland for the Israelites. If we trust both the biblical account and genetic reasoning, the current identification of Israelite remains in the Middle East, showing mostly Levantine DNA haplogroups, not African, ancestry, are incorrect and must be reconsidered. With regards to the linguistics question, Western experts say the Hebrew language is part of the Afroasiatic group that started in Africa. They also say this language group is only 10,000 to 15,000 years old. This is a very short time in history. If the people who started the Hebrew language moved from Africa to Asia only 10,000 years ago, they would still look and be biologically African. It takes much longer than that for people to change into a different race. Many experts might have ignored or lied about the African origin of the ancient Israelites because of old prejudices. They wanted to keep the stories of the Bible separate from Africa, but the Bible itself shows this deep connection. In the book of Genesis, it says that the Garden of Eden had a river called Gin which flowed around the whole land of Cush, which is in Africa. This shows the very beginning of the human story was linked to Africa. Also, in the book of Amos, God asks if the children of Israel are not just like the people of Ethiopia to him. This verse suggests that the Israelites and the Africans were seen as very similar by God. If the language is African and the migration was recent, then the people must be of African origin. Western traditional scholars labeling the ancient Hebrew Israelites as Asian is clearly a fraudulent strategy to hide their true original African ancestry. By looking at the timing of the language and the Bible verses, we can see that the chosen people were part of the African family tree. This is a simple fact that comes from looking at how languages and people move over time. The evidence shows that the history of the Israelites is truly an African story that has fraudulently been relocated to Asia. As we come towards the end of this video, I would like to state that the history of biblical interpretation has been shaped by imperial power and European scholars' bias in favor of Middle East, not by neutral reading of the text. Over many centuries, church councils, imperial agendas, and later European scholarship combined to produce a model of biblical geography that is centered in the Levant and Europe, while systematically marginalizing Africa, even when the Bible's own geography points clearly to African locations. This is not a claim about secret plots. It is a claim about public decisions, visible patterns, and consistent outcomes that can be traced in three areas. 1. Canon formation, which books were accepted or excluded. 2. Geographical interpretation, where events were located on the map. 3. Historical narrative, which peoples were remembered, and which were declared lost. When these three levels are examined together, they reveal a self-reinforcing system that moves the center of the biblical story away from Africa, even when the primary text itself points there. From the late Roman period onward, decisions about scripture and doctrine were made in contexts where Rome, Constantinople, and later Western Europe held political and religious power. Church councils openly decided what counted as orthodox and which texts were to be ignored or suppressed. Texts and traditions that mentioned African geography and did not fit emerging imperial geography were left out of the canon, labeled heretical, or treated as apocryphal. Always remember the word apocrypha actually means hidden away. African centers of Christianity, Alexandria, Nubia, Ethiopia, gradually lost influence over the official map of Bible lands. This process did not need secrecy. It worked through public decrees, official canons, and teaching traditions. Once a Levant-centered map was accepted, every later generation simply assumed it was correct and forced the text to fit it. Modern biblical scholarship inherited this map, rather than proving it from scratch. As a result, several recurring patterns appear. 1. Relocation of African figures. Figures like Nimrod, rooted in African Cushite lines, are routinely shifted toward Mesopotamia through interpretive steps not stated in the Bible text. The Bible itself does not narrate these moves, commentators do. 2. Ignoring clear African markers. Rivers like Gihon and Pishon are described as encircling Cush, yet most modern maps of the Promised Land ignore African river systems and instead force everything into Mesopotamian or Levantine space. This is not demanded by the text. It is demanded by the inherited model. 3. Erasing African Israelite locations. Texts that speak of peoples beyond the rivers of Cush and promise their return are passed over lightly, while the idea of lost tribes is repeated as if the Bible itself had declared them lost. Again, the model overrules the plain reading. 4. Default paganizing of African sites. When large ancient religious structures are found in Ethiopia, Sudan, or other parts of Eastern Africa, they are almost always labeled as pagan or South Arabian cults, and almost never examined as potential evidence of early YHWH-centered worship, even when dates, scale, and regional context allow the question. Individually, each of these might be explained away. Together, they form a pattern. Africa is consistently pushed to the edge of the biblical story. It is hard to say these mistakes are accidental when they almost always point in the same direction. They rarely place the stories in Africa. Instead, they usually push the stories toward the Middle East and Europe. For example, when the Bible mentions Cush in Africa, many interpreters shift the location to Mesopotamia. When the text talks about areas near African rivers, maps move those rivers and events to the Middle East. When the Bible places Israelite activity near or beyond the rivers of Cush, traditional scholars talks about lost tribes instead. This same pattern shows up in the books chosen as official canon. Maps were drawn, and commentaries assumed movements out of Africa by biblical patriarchs such as Nimrod, without proof from the text. Altogether, this looks less like neutral interpretation, and more like a system shaped by later imperial and European bias in favor of the Middle East, the Levant and Asia. So in conclusion, it is increasingly becoming clear that Africa fits key biblical events more naturally than the Middle East, the Levant, and Asia. First, rivers of Eden. The Bible associates Gin with Cush and places Pishon around regions that match African gold lands. African river systems and regions around Cush fit these clues more directly than any forced Mesopotamian reconstruction. Second, Cush as a major neighbor. The Bible repeatedly treats Cush/Ethiopia as a significant power and close neighbor to Israelite history, which makes excellent sense if much of the story unfolds within or adjacent to African lands. Third, the phrase, beyond the rivers of Cush. Passages that place worshippers or scattered Israelites beyond African rivers fit naturally if Israel's historical movements are understood along the Nile and related African river systems, rather than from a tiny Levantine strip outward. Fourth, the Red Sea and southern routes. Accounts of movement by the way of the Red Sea toward southern regions, combined with descriptions of desert, mountains, and acacia zones, align well with Northeast African and Horn of Africa landscapes. Fifth, scale and population spread. A nation emerging from millions of people leaving Egypt and spreading out fits the large landmass and diverse environments of Africa more comfortably than the narrow Levantine coastal strip. These points do not prove every specific identification, but they show that Africa is often a better match to the text than the standard Levant-only model. So in short, I am not claiming that Western traditional powers and scholars gathered in secret to conspire and lie about biblical locations. Rather, my claim is that over many centuries, Western imperial powers openly met at conferences in Trent, Nicaea and other ecumenical councils, and employed selective canonization and Middle Eastern assumptions to create a system in which Africa is erased and almost never considered the natural home of biblical events. African evidence is routinely reinterpreted to fit non-African models, and the plain geographical clues of the Bible are bent to match an inherited Middle Eastern map from earlier manipulations of the biblical maps by their earlier ancestors. So what Western traditional scholarship did was not just shift names on a map, they also stole the promised land from Africa and relocated it on paper to the Middle East. But the Bible, when read carefully and consistently, still points back to Africa every step of the way. So I hope I have been able to answer some of the questions you asked in the comments section on previous videos. Thanks for watching. If you learned something new today, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss future uploads. See you in the next one.